Welcome to the Deep Dive. We've got some really fascinating material you shared, all focused on, well, understanding love and marriage.
That's right.
And our goal here, for you listening, is to really cut through the noise, pull out the most useful stuff, the real insight.
Find those aha moments.
Exactly, without, drowning you in information.
Yeah, information overload is real. So we're diving deep today into something called the imprint of intimacy.
Okay.
It's basically the lessons about love we pick up super early, mostly from our parents or main caregivers. And this imprint, well, it shapes what the authors of How We Love call our love style.
Our love style.
How we act in relationships, especially marriage. It has a huge impact, whether we realize it or not.
So this imprint,
Yeah.
it's not just about, like, happy childhood memories or lack thereof.
It's more fundamental than that. The book calls it a revolutionary truth. Everyone gets this imprint. It's like an internal blueprint for love, built from all those early interactions. And that blueprint determines your love style, how you connect, what you expect, how you react.
And I guess the book suggests that while maybe some people got a really solid blueprint, most of us didn't.
That's pretty much the idea, yeah. Some people had really positive early experiences leading to healthy love styles, but many, maybe most, had experiences that were, let's say, less than ideal.
Okay.
And that leads to what they call harmful imprints and these impaired love styles. So we want to help you understand these common patterns.
Impaired love styles.
Yeah.
Sounds a little clinical, maybe.
Well, it's just a way to describe how those early, maybe difficult imprints show up later. The book lays out 5 common ones that tend to cause friction.
Okay, what are they?
There's the avoider, the pleaser, the vacillator, and then a category called chaotic, which splits into the controller and the victim.
Got it. So these aren't just random personality traits. They're linked back to those early experiences.
That's the core idea, yeah. These styles create really predictable patterns. It's like the imprint is stuck on repeat, playing out the same dynamics over and over until we actually notice the pattern.
This is starting to sound familiar, like attachment theory concepts.
Absolutely. The authors connect it directly. Attachment theory is all about that bond with the primary caregiver, right?
Right.
And how those first relationships influence us later. They argue we're basically designed for connection, and childhood is where we learn how or how not to do it. Those early interactions leave a really deep mark and imprint that we see playing out in our adult love lives.
They use that image, like we're wet lumps of clay and our parents leave these indelible stamps. That kind of sticks with you.
It really does. It emphasizes how powerful those early years are. And to help figure out your own imprint, they suggest asking yourself the comfort question.
The comfort question. Okay, what is that?
It's pretty simple, actually. Can you remember as a child being comforted after you were emotionally upset? The way you answer that, they say, tells you a lot about how you approach connection and vulnerability now.
How so?
Well, if you do remember being comforted, like physically held, really listened to, having your feelings, what they call soul words, accepted.
Soul words, like your core emotions?
Yeah, exactly. Sadness, fear, anger, joy. If those were acknowledged and soothed, and you saw problems worked through healthily, that builds a secure imprint. It's like getting great dance lessons for relationships.
Okay.
So remembering comfort usually means you learned it's okay to show feelings, seek connection when you're down, and actually expect to feel better through that connection. Turning to a partner feels, well, natural.
And if you can't remember being comforted,
Yeah.
or those experiences were rare or negative.
Well, that lack of comfort can lead to real difficulties later on. Trouble expressing emotions, maybe? Or even knowing what you're feeling.
Right.
It can make you hesitant to seek comfort, or maybe even awkward offering it. And this really sets the stage for understanding those 5 impaired styles.
Okay, let's dig into those then. Maybe start with the first one, the avoider. What does that look like and where does it come from?
Sure. So the avoider often had parents who maybe weren't very tuned in emotionally, not necessarily bad parents, but just not great at recognizing or responding to a child's feelings.
So the child's emotional world didn't get much attention.
Exactly. Maybe
Yeah.
there wasn't much physical affection or deep emotional sharing. So the child learns, often unconsciously, to kind of turn down the volume on their own feelings.
Why?
To cope, really. If your needs aren't being met, expressing them can feel anxious or pointless. So you learn to minimize needs, rely on yourself. Self-sufficiency becomes the goal.
Ah, so that strong independence isn't always just a personality trait. It can be a defense.
It often is, yeah. They learn independence might please parents who are maybe uncomfortable with neediness themselves.
Yeah.
So avoiders can take real pride in being self-sufficient.
Have you asked them about childhood?
They might just say it was fine. They often genuinely don't see the emotional gaps because that was just normal for them.
Okay. And in adult relationships, how does the avoider style play out?
Well, they tend to avoid, hence the name. Avoid vulnerability, deep emotional conversations, neediness in themselves or their partner.
Keep things surface level.
Pretty much. Honest self-reflection can feel threatening too. You might hear them say, especially when things get emotional, I don't want to talk about it.
Right. Makes sense if they never really learned how to talk about it.
Exactly. They didn't have those opportunities growing up. And the book mentions sometimes this can overlap with introversion.
How so?
Well, an introvert's natural tendency to process internally can sometimes reinforce that reluctance to share outwardly. Not all introverts are avoiders, of course, but it can look similar sometimes.
Okay.
And if you pressure an avoider to open up before they're ready, they can feel really inadequate, which might come out as irritation or anger.
Got it. Okay. Style number 2. The pleaser. What's the story there?
The pleaser often grows up with parents who were maybe anxious themselves or critical, maybe angry, or just hard to predict.
So the child learns to manage the parent's emotions.
You got it.
Yeah.
They become little experts at reading the room, figuring out what the parent needs, and providing it to gain approval or just to keep the peace, reduce the tension.
Wow. That's a heavy burden for a kid.
It really is. They become hyper-attuned to others' feelings, often absorbing the stress around them, and they try to make everyone happy, partly to soothe their own anxiety.
So they're prioritizing everyone else's feelings.
Constantly, often at the expense of their own needs and feelings, which they rarely get a chance to even process. There's no space for their anxiety.
The book also mentioned something about rescuing parents contributing to this.
Yes, good point. Parents who jump in to fix everything for the child, solve every problem, smooth over every frustration, even with good intentions.
They send the message, you can't handle this.
Precisely. It undermines the child's resilience, their ability to struggle and persevere. It reinforces that need for external help and validation. You need someone else to make it okay.
And how does this look in adulthood? What are the signs of a pleaser?
They might often downplay their own stress, saying things like, oh, I'm not worried, I'm just stressed. They minimize their own anxiety.
Right.
And they often repeat that pattern of managing others' emotions. The book gives an example, Terry, who found herself constantly trying to manage her boss's stress levels at work.
And that was echoing something from her childhood.
Yeah, it mirrored how she dealt with a difficult sibling relationship growing up. These patterns just, they follow us, you know?
Wild. Okay, let's talk about the vacillator. What are the roots of that style?
Vacilators typically grew up with inconsistency. Maybe a parent who was sometimes really engaged and warm, but other times distant, preoccupied, or unavailable.
So the connection wasn't reliable.
Exactly. It was unpredictable. And this creates a really deep, persistent need for consistent connection, coupled with a powerful fear of abandonment. They never knew if the connection would be there.
That sounds really anxiety-provoking.
It is, and it often leaves them kind of stuck in what the book calls a state of protest about those unmet needs. They're often preoccupied with feelings of frustration or distress about the relationship.
That comes out as
Anger, often. They become prone to anger when they feel that need for connection isn't being met, or if they perceive distance or withdrawal from their partner.
so anger is the go-to response when they feel insecure in the connection.
Frequently, yes. The book notes they might even unconsciously exaggerate feelings to get attention, to make sure they're seen and the connection is maintained. And this can carry into marriage. They might get angry, then withdraw, almost waiting to be pursued, needing that reassurance. They often get mad, not sad.
Mad, not sad. So the anger is covering up deeper hurt or fear.
Usually, yeah. The key is often getting to the hurt under the anger, the fear of being left, the disappointment.
And I imagine the end of the honeymoon phase in a relationship is particularly tough for vacillators.
Devastating. Yeah. They often idealize new relationships, hoping this time they'll finally get that perfect, consistent connection. So when the normal bumps and realities of long-term relating set in.
It feels like a huge betrayal or abandonment.
Exactly. That disappointment can trigger intense anger, often fueled by all those old childhood wounds. The underlying feeling is often that painful question, why don't you want me?
Wow.
The book mentions Leah, who kept having these intense beginnings followed by that familiar, crushing feeling of loss. It's a tough cycle.
Definitely. Okay, finally, the chaotic styles, the controller and the victim. You said these often come from more severe situations.
Yes, unfortunately. These imprints often develop in homes where things were genuinely unsafe or destructive. Maybe parental addiction, serious mental illness, abuse, neglect, or even total absence.
Really difficult environments.
Very. In these chaotic homes, the parents themselves often lack emotional regulation skills. They might have a high need for control, low tolerance for disagreement because their own lives feel out of control.
And the impact on the kids.
Well, kids in these situations often learn that vulnerability or expressing needs is dangerous. So they learn to shut those feelings down just to survive the turmoil.
Makes sense. So how do the two styles diverge? Let's start with the controller.
The controller learns that the only way to feel safe is to be in charge, because the alternative they experienced was being controlled, often harshly or unfairly.
So power and control become paramount.
Absolutely. Negotiation, compromise. Those can feel incredibly threatening. It often feels like an either me or you win-lose situation. There's no room for mutual give and take.
And the book mentioned a sad irony.
Yeah, that often what was done to them as kids, they end up doing to others, using control, maybe anger, to manage their own deep-seated feelings of insecurity or inadequacy that they never learned to handle healthily.
Wow. And the victim, the other side of that chaotic coin.
The victim learns a different survival strategy. Instead of fighting for control, they learn to endure, to tolerate mistreatment. High anxiety just becomes normal life.
They adapt by accepting the chaos.
In a way, yes. But that chronic stress takes a toll. They often develop stress-related health problems. You might hear, I don't feel well a lot.
And what about the anger? Does it just disappear?
No, it gets bottled up. All that fear and humiliation builds inside. And sometimes, the book notes, it can erupt unexpectedly, often directed at people perceived as weaker, sadly, sometimes their own kids.
That's heavy. It sounds like healing from either of these chaotic styles would be a really big journey.
It is. The book really stresses that for controllers and victims, healing often needs to start outside the relationship, maybe even outside the home, in a truly safe, supportive environment. Therapy, support groups, places where they can experience genuine safety and acceptance, maybe for the first time.
This whole framework, the imprint, the 5 styles, it's a lot to take in, but it really shines a light on patterns you might not have understood before.
Definitely.
So if someone's listening and thinking, okay, I think I see myself or my partner in one of these, what's the next step? How do you figure out your own style?
Well, the book emphasizes self-reflection is key. Just, thinking honestly about your childhood. Did any of those descriptions ring true?
That comfort question seems like a good starting point, too.
It really is. Asking yourself about those early experiences of comfort or lack thereof. But, it's not always easy to see ourselves clearly.
No, definitely not. Especially looking back at childhood.
It can be tough, especially if you haven't really thought much about your feelings or your upbringing before. The book even suggests sometimes asking a spouse or maybe a sibling for their perspective on your early years. They might remember things you don't.
That's a good idea. Okay, so let's say someone has an inkling of their style. What's the path forward? How do you actually change these patterns? The book talks about a comfort circle, right?
Yes. The comfort circle is presented as the way out, the way to break those old patterns. It's basically a roadmap for how to give and receive comfort effectively in a relationship.
Okay. What does it involve? What are the steps?
It's a cycle, really. It starts with being vulnerable, sharing your real feelings, then speaking truthfully about your needs and experiences. Then, crucially, listening deeply to your partner.
Listening without jumping in to fix or defend.
Exactly. Deep, empathetic listening. And finally, actively trying to bring comfort and relief to your partner when they're distressed.
The book had that story, Alan Tamra. He was an avoider, and she was trying to use the comfort circle.
Right, and it showed how tough it is if only one person is trying. It really highlighted that mutual effort is pretty crucial for this to work long term.
But it can work.
Oh, absolutely. The book shares stories, particularly from men who tried these steps. They reported things like less anxiety, better intimacy, feeling truly accepted. It shows change is possible.
But it takes practice, I assume.
Definitely. It's not magic. It takes time, practice, probably some awkward moments, trial and error, learning new steps together.
Like Tim and Claire, with his avoider tendencies and her tears. That example showed it's a process, right? Engaging, exploring, resolving.
Precisely. It illustrated those steps in action. And the goal, the formula they offer, is pretty simple. Low anxiety plus high closeness equals trust and bonding.
Simple but powerful.
Yeah, that's what the comfort circle aims to build.
Okay, but what if you're thinking, my partner's never going to do this? What if they're resistant?
That's a super common concern.
Yeah.
The book's advice is basically focus on your side of the equation first. Start practicing the comfort circle steps yourself.
Even if they don't reciprocate right away.
Even then, because when one person changes their steps in the dance, the whole dynamic often shifts. Your changes might actually invite or inspire your partner to respond differently over time. You can only control your own actions, right?
True. What about internal roadblocks, like fear of feeling big emotions? The book had that whiz gas analogy.
Yeah, the whiz gas and whiz out gas tanks.
Yeah.
It's about understanding your internal state, the pressure building up versus your capacity to handle it. It points to the need for self-awareness.
You have to know what you're feeling before you can share it.
Exactly. You need that self-reflection. Your feelings are like the dashboard light signals about your underlying needs. You have to pay attention to them first.
And then there are those triggers.
Right. Those unresolved bits from the past that just set you off. Like John clenching his jaw when his wife used a certain tone.
Even if she didn't mean anything by it.
Yeah, his reaction was about his past, not necessarily the present moment. Recognizing your own triggers is huge for not getting derailed in these conversations.
And honesty, vulnerability, those are essential, but can feel risky.
Totally. The book stresses honesty is fundamental for intimacy. Hiding creates walls. And yeah, vulnerability feels scary. But true vulnerability in the comfort circle isn't just dumping. It's tied to a commitment to change and grow together.
So it's about showing up differently.
It's deciding to be both a giver and a receiver, connecting through that shared vulnerability, and doing it with, as the book says, sweetness of speech.
Not attacking, even when you're being honest.
Right, which leads to that crucial skill, extended listening.
Tell me more about that. It sounds important.
It's huge. It means one person just listens. Deeply. No interrupting, no defending, no problem solving, just listening to understand.
Asking questions to clarify.
Yes, asking clarifying questions and then summarizing. Like, so it sounds like you felt X when Y happened, and you keep doing that until the speaker says, yes, that's exactly it.
Like Ken and Regina's ping pong example, shifting from quick volleys to actually hearing each other.
Exactly that. And using I statements is vital here. I feel hurt when.
Not, you always make me feel.
Big difference. Avoids blame.
Totally.
That.
And then there's validation, which is basically saying, I understand why you feel that way, or your feelings make sense, even if you don't agree with their whole perspective.
Accepting their emotional reality.
You got it. The book gives great examples of questions to ask during listening about feelings, past experiences, hopes, needs, even physical sensations. It's about exploring their world.
And they even tailor suggestions for each love style, like what an avoider needs to work on versus a pleaser. Yes, specific goals, like maybe the pleaser needs to practice not fixing their partner's distress immediately, and the avoider needs practice initiating talks about feelings.
That's really practical.
It is. And after all that listening and validating,
Right.
then you ask that key question.
What you need.
Yes. Because they know best what would bring relief, and sometimes just being heard like that is the relief. The extended listening itself is enough.
Wow.
Of course, sometimes more is needed. Owning your part, apologizing sincerely, that's crucial too.
And they address the common male tendency to jump straight to problem solving.
They do. Emphasizing the need to balance that with just listening and validating the emotion first, that's often what's needed most.
What about physical touch? Comfort.
Also important. Physical nurturing is part of it, though
Right.
they acknowledge that can be hard for some people depending on their past. And they also mention self-soothing. You can't expect your partner to meet every single need. You need your own resources, too.
Right. It's not about becoming totally dependent.
No, it's about becoming securely interdependent, facing things together, which ties into that final analogy.
The hurricane hunters versus the small planes.
Yeah. Are you avoiding the storms in your relationship? Or are you learning, like the hurricane hunters, to fly into them constructively, using the comfort circle to navigate the turbulence and come out stronger?
That's a powerful image to end on. Flying into the storm together, essentially.
That's the goal. Growth happens in facing the difficulties, not avoiding them.
This has been incredibly insightful, really understanding that imprint of intimacy, seeing how it shapes these different love styles, and then having this practical framework of the comfort circle. It feels really helpful.
I hope so. The first step is really that awareness, isn't it? Understanding your own imprint, your style.
Yeah. So for everyone listening, maybe take some time to reflect. Which style or maybe styles resonated? Think about that comfort question. How did comfort work or not work in your childhood?
And consider how those patterns might be showing up now. And remember, the comfort circle, becoming vulnerable, speaking truth, listening deeply, bringing relief. Those are the
It's
steps.
about learning new dances, as the book says, not being stuck in the old steps forever.
Exactly. Our past shapes us, no doubt. But it doesn't have to dictate our future relationships. We can learn healthier ways to connect.
So maybe the final thought is just that. We have the power to learn and change, to build deeper, more fulfilling connections. It starts with understanding these dynamics.
Absolutely. Keep exploring, keep reflecting, and think about how you can start practicing even small steps of the comfort circle. It's a journey, but a worthwhile one.